I'm Jesse Randall. I'm the director of the Forest Biomass Innovation Center, and I'm based out of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And this is going to be, that doesn't even look like it's in focus. There we go. And so my job there, I work with maple syrup, I work with Christmas trees, primarily with producers and growers, trying to do to increase their production, to increase or increase the profits of that. And we have a wide range of interests, and we're moving more and more into the maple and the Christmas tree realm. I've been there about a year and a half. For the last 11 years, I was in Iowa at Iowa State University, talking forestry and private lands in Iowa. And most of that work was focused on wildlife habitat improvement and doing good forestry. And so where are we? There's the UP. Pretty much we claim Wisconsin rather than downstate. But we have a couple of properties across the UP. I live right there. There's 1,900 acres right at that research facility. And we have about 5,700 acres over in the Sioux by Canada. And then we have another 600-700 acres up here. And it allows us to do a lot of different treatments in a lot of different systems. And so as we zoom in, you begin to notice the dark green is lowland conifer swamps. So we do a lot with lowland conifer swamps and deer herd management. But then all of the orange areas those are our future sugarbush areas. And so over the years, you kind of have an idea of what we're looking at. I was blessed to walk into a woods that has been managed for the last 30-some years, and they've never really tapped it for the last, well, it was tapped about 50 years ago, but we're looking at about 2,500 taps that we're going to install over the course of the next year. We're looking at demonstrations of different mainline systems and different vacuum systems to show more as a demonstration, less as a research. And a lot of the work that I do is with microbiologists looking at how tubing sanitation is working, and we're trying new products that are already FDA listed as food grade in other industries and bringing them in, looking at some of the issues that go with as you sanitize tubing, you break down plastics or have the potential to break down plastics. It has the potential to add off flavors to your sap. And so we're looking at those different areas. The reason I bring that up is because that is where we're moving. Michigan State has decided to invest in maple syrup and in Christmas trees, and both traditional products and the value-added products. We're seeing in the maple research and demonstration world, those individuals starting to retire, and universities are not backfilling very well, and so we're starting to see, at least Michigan State has started to see the importance of backfilling into some of those roles, and so that's why they're building these new facilities and putting me in them. But that's not really why you're here. We need to now take that new sugar bush and begin the layout process. How am I going to do it in the most efficient manner? And I thought to myself, I have an individual who is a GIS expert on staff, but you don't have access to a lot of the same equipment that I have. All right, so it kind of took the fun out of it if I sent him out there and he can GPS. We actually map seedlings with GPS. That's how accurate we are. You don't have that, or most of you, I would say, do not have that capacity. And so I started to put this together, and I talked to Teresa when she was like, well, what do you want to talk about? I said, well, we're learning as we go through this new sugar bush what is available out there for the producers online. It's completely free. What are they going to have, and how are they going to use it? And how accurate is it compared to some of our really hyper accurate survey grade equipment that we have? And so who's heard of Google Earth? We all have Google Earth. I have it on my phone. What about USGS national map? All right, any cartographers here? Oh, great. You could teach this class. Come on now.
You want ArcGIS?
Yeah, no. And then web soil survey. Those are the three that I'm going to focus on because that's going to help us define our sugar bush. It's going to help us delineate some of our stands. It's going to help us look at how those soils are going to interact and how those soils drain in terms of how productive those trees are or how stressed those trees could be. The national map, I really didn't know much about it. Probably starting 4 or 5 months ago, that's when I found it, and I was shocked as to what it can do. And you have to realize every state is a little different in what they subscribe into for that, you know, in terms of the layers, and you're going to see that here in a minute, the layers that are available to you. And I thought, my first inkling was, let's just do a live demo. I'll just pick somebody's, you know, sugar bush, and we'll pull it up, and we'll do the whole thing. It takes pretty good Wi-Fi to do that, and they don't have pretty good Wi-Fi, all right? And so the last thing live demonstrations are known for is epic failures, all right? So we did a static talk today. So Google Earth, okay? It is great to spy on your neighbors. There is normally pretty accurate and pretty up-to-date imagery. The nice thing with Google Earth is you can go back in time if they have a photo there. And so it's really neat to see that forest change over time. It's not always the same picture in terms of, is it a fall image, is it a spring image, is it a leaf off period? So you just have to look at it, and you'll be shocked to see how the quality of the photographs have improved even over the last few years. The quality and the frequency at which they're now coming out with new photos is really ramping up, and it's going to change how we do things. But Google Earth is really good for a few things that I use it for. One is I look at the old photos, I spy on my neighbors with what they're doing, primarily when it comes to their deer food management. But I can also use the basic tools to measure distance. I can measure area with it. And so I use this once I have overlaid my trails, then I can look at each of those areas, how many acres are in them, and start to lay out other measurements. All right, go ahead.
I took up Google Earth and looked at my lot today, if you were able to do that.
Yep.
How do I know when that picture was taken?
Yep.
I can't see very good.
Yep. Well, it's on the bottom down here, which I've cut off. Okay. It will give you an image date. Okay. But then up here, there's another, and I should have had that one on, and I don't. There's like a, I think it's not the clock, but there's a button on the top that will allow you, once you highlight that, it's a sliding bar, and every place where there's a hash, it'll be, you know, 2019, 2017, 2011, 2003, and you just slide to that, and then the image pops up. All right, it's not every year there's not a new image wherever those hash marks are, and so that is it's a cool tool. You can also get to see how the sun rises and sets based on the time frame with Google Earth, but that's more for the nerd rather than the sugar maker. We can get to Topo Maps. All right, so you can look at these maps, and you know, this is that actual area in there. It's hard to see with this projector and this light, but you begin to see that I'm not actually dealing with a lot of topography here. It's not like I'm living in a mountain region where those lines are very close together. But what you begin to see is these kind of mounds that we deal with up there. We're right on the edge of that glaciation that kind of scarred the Upper Peninsula from northeast to southwest, laying out those drumlins and carving that topography. We're right on the edge of that. So we're pretty flat land, all right? And that makes it a challenge getting sap off of it. All right, how many folks have heard of LiDAR? All right, LiDAR is really, in a lot of cases, some high resolution type imagery. It's flown with special lenses, and it really begins to pop out certain landscape features, all right? So here's our woods, and you begin to see all of those black areas, and this isn't the best or highest resolution projector, but that really gives you almost a three-dimensional picture out there. But every one of these, that's a lane going back, all right? There's another one. This isn't a lane, but that was a fence line, all right? And so anytime you have wind and it's lifting sediment and it hits a fence line with the old sheep fence or the woven wire fence, it deposits the soil on the downwind side. So you can actually see old fence lines. You can see old building structures that, you know, when you're walking around, it doesn't become evident until you're at the bird's eye view, all right? You can see Native American mounds with this as well. So it's kind of cool to zoom into like effigy mounds and some of those other ones and really have a good handle on what it's doing. So that's the hill shade or the LiDAR as part of that. So when you're here, this is what you're seeing. These are all of the different options that you can have. And you want to click on the layer list, and that's what's different for every state. You can have aerial imagery, you can have hill shade, you can have topography, and it's all right in the national map viewer, all right? It is all at your fingertips. The nice thing is, with the national map, you can marry them together and overlay them. And you can change the transparencies, so you can put your air image out there, and then you can put your LiDAR on top of it and begin to manipulate the transparencies so that the one shines through the other, and it begins to pop out where your landscape features are that you've walked around for years. You just don't get a good sense until you see it on its area. Sometimes, and it's not in this image, you can even pick out logging roads and logging trails from the LiDAR. LiDAR kind of strips away the above ground or the trees, and it really gets down to your trails. But this one doesn't really show it. So there's a blown up version of it. Again, rather blurry. But this is kind of what I work with. And when you have more of a fall or a gradient, you will really begin to see more of the features that you begin to work around. The dark is more of it pops out the slope or the shading, so you know that's a relief. All right, you know that there's a hill on this side, and what I would envision is this is the sun and this is casting a shade or a shadow on it. All right, so you know there's some topography there. All right, so the really cool thing, and actually it's surprisingly accurate. How many folks have played around with this to the point of knowing what their elevations are? This is where it is the mainline layout tool of the future if you begin to learn it. I went around and I started putting points in to find the lowest spot in my woods. What is the lowest spot in any sugar woods? Collection point, where you put your tank. You start at the lowest point and you work uphill. That's the lowest point in my woods. I tell it now that I want to do an elevation profile, and I dictate where I think I'm going to put my main line. I started putting in points all the way up through, and when you hit go, it calculates based off of the LiDAR what your elevation change is from this first point. All right, so this first point represents 718 feet above sea level. This little red X corresponds to this area right here. So as you move your cursor back and forth, it's telling you where on the landscape it is. So you can save these tracks and you can dump it into your phone, into a free GIS software on your phone or Onyx Map. We're working to get it dumped into Onyx Map. So I know I want a main line to come up through here, but I'm going to have a little 1 or 2 foot blip that I'm gonna have to come across. Overall, from this point to this point, I have 20 some feet of fall. I can also then calculate the distance I've traveled on that path. So if I know the distance of my main line, I know how much to order. And if I know the fall that I have to work with, I know my slope. I know if I'm in that sweet spot or if I'm gonna have a level area, all right? And so you can then begin to stack these lines on top of each other and start to get a fairly accurate picture of where you need to put your main lines, how much main line you're gonna have, how much fall that you're going to have. And this was eye-opening for me. And then I thought, well, how accurate is the machine? And it's actually surprisingly accurate when we took out our GPS unit. And so we are now in the process over the next year of taking this, and by next year we should have some videos on this, taking this now, putting it into our phones or our handheld GPS units, which are available for not that much money. Actually, your smartphones are probably as powerful as a lot of the homeowner version, Garmin's and some of those others, going out and then beginning the process of laying it out. Right? It was really eye-opening, the power that sat there that I never even knew about. Have you ever heard about this? Oh, of course, the Wisconsin guy has.
How large of an area
is this?
Are you looking at?
This area is 30 acres.
Oh, really?
So that is a 30-acre spot. Now, as you go smaller and smaller, the LiDAR's all at 1 resolution. And so when you get too small, it really loses precision, or it becomes grainy, let's say. Way more grainy than this projector is. So it works well at larger areas, and it works well with more topographic relief. It really becomes easier to use the larger the area is. But still, I know I have to work around certain of those mounds, but I have an idea of now where we want to go and flag out for our main line. All right, it was pretty cool. All right, just that's a blown up version of it. And then know that you can go back and forth. And as you go, what it's telling you is from this point to my initial tank point, I have 14 feet of elevation change. Plus means you're going up in elevation, minus means you didn't set your tank in the right location, all right? And so, you know, when I started, and you don't see this picture, I started just putting points out there all the way along where I thought my tank could go, and I found my lowest elevation point. And I knew that was gonna be my tank. I then sent my guys out there and they dug a big hole to put my tanks down in. So I wanted even more elevation drop. And so my tanks went into the ground. So, all right, web soil survey. How many folks have ever played around with the web soil survey? Cool. This is one of those sites. Again, it's going to help as you begin to evaluate a potential sugar bush in terms of how well is the soil going to support tree growth, how well is it going to support you know, the drainage, are you going to deal with ponding, and it takes time to learn. All right, any of these, the National Map Viewer, the Web Soil Survey, even Google Earth, takes time to learn, and don't expect to just pick it up and run with it. But this is what you'll see when you get onto the USDA Web Soil Survey. I'm not the brightest bulb out there. It took me a while to figure out where to start. You know, I didn't really realize the green button that said start is actually a working button, but that's where you're going to start from. Once you click on it, up comes the US map. All right, so this is viable across the country. And so then, and again, it's hard to see these guys, but you have a lot of the same symbols across the platforms. You know, there's a hand which allows you to move. There is a symbol that allows you to zoom in or zoom out. and then there's some that say AOI, so area of interest, and those kind of are our primary ones. Once I to zoom in, now I've zoomed in on a location. This happens to be our sugarbush in upstate New York, mainly because when I did this for our location in Escanaba, the soils were so boring, it didn't really show anything that I wanted to show you because there was no difference across our soils. They were not that good, they were rocky, and they were not interesting. So here's another sugarbush that I'm very familiar with. I've zoomed now in on it, and I've set that this is my rough area that I want to look at, all right? So once I've done that, the computer is already thinking in the background, what am I going to ask it to do next? And there's a little button that says Set AOI. You click on that, and there's two AOI buttons, and it took me a while to figure out the two. One, you could just click here and drag a box right around, and it's just going to give you everything in that box. The other one that says AOI, and it's got all of these squiggles, and then it connects, that's the one that allows you to draw in an individual polygon. Because this is not a nice, neat square that I'm worried about, because again, I don't care about our crop fields, that's the farmer's issue. I care about the timber. So when I do that, when I set my area of interest with that polygon maker, you begin to get these hash marks. So this is what I drew in, and now the computer is only going to tell me information pertaining to what's inside that hash mark, okay? And I'm in this tab. There's like 4 or 5 tabs across the top. You can't read them, and I'm not going to make them up right now. But this is the area of interest. That's the tab that allows you to set your area. Once you set that, I sat here when I was first learning it, and I was like, okay, that's impressive. I have a hash box around our sugar bush. It's just not doing anything, all right? So a few minutes later, a couple of cups of coffee later, I realized, well, I have to go to the soils tab now, all right? So once you click on the soils tab, automatically it has looked at the soils, it has broken them down. Now, I'm not saying that you should go out and know that you are exactly in that soil type. It is not that precise, but it's better than guessing out there. Some might say it is guessing, but this gives me an indication, and looking at this map is not that far off. And if you could read it, there's all these different symbols. Those are those soil, if you've ever used the printed soils books, that's the exact same symbol that they're using here. And you get a breakdown as to what those soils mean and how many acres are there. And so this is our sugar bush. We call this the bench, all right? That is a grade going up through, beautiful sugar maples in there. And so I'm going to pull this one out, come over here, and as long as I click on one of these names, it's going to even give me more detail out there. All right? So you click on one of these that you're interested in, and up pops a laundry list of almost unreadable quality. I should have brought mine in from the truck. But it's going to give you slope. It's going to give you soils. It's going to give you the drainage capacity of those. All right, and I'm looking at depth to different horizons. That will tell me soil productivity, and in turn, tree productivity. Again, I'm looking, when I evaluate a sugar bush, I want to know, all right, are these sites going to drain well? Are they going to grow real, pretty nice trees? And whereabouts am I going to go? And this then begins to set the formation of how do I break down my stands. If I don't have any known trails or anything in here right now, can I break down my stands based on soil types? All right, how is it going to change? You don't know this, but this soil type down here, it's a little bit flatter. Really nice cherry and oak down in that. As I come up, I'm getting a lot more maple per acre. I come over into this is a nice draw in here. This happens to be a little bit wetter, all right? So my tree composition is going to switch from sugar maple to red maple, all right? Are we going to treat those the same when we go out and work with them? How do I want to segment this area? Or how do I want to evaluate it in terms of surveying for the density of how many trees we have and what we have? All right. So a lot of information, and you can spend a lot of time, and you should spend a lot of time learning what those soils are and what they mean. And you know, this is one of those things that you do on those rainy days where you can't really cut firewood or be working in the woods, but you can be online learning about your sugar bush. Okay. Whew. I don't even know what time is it?
35.
All right, we got 20 minutes. Woo. Okay. Any questions so far? I know it's blurry, and I apologize for that, but any questions on the mapping side of things? All right, there's a lot of free tools out there. How many folks have ever used Onyx Maps, Onyx Hunt Maps? Really cool in terms of being able to go in and you can either set waypoints or you can mark trails with that, and it will follow you. And so our guys went in and hit the Onyx map, and they wanted to follow their trail or follow their footsteps, and they walked around all of the different loops in there. And then we're working at being able to add layers to it and strip layers out of it. There's some other online tools that we're just now starting to play around with, and I didn't show because I don't know them well enough to be able to do that and then marry it on top of some of our other mapping platforms. But if you get the National Map Viewer nailed down and you learn about your soils, you should be able to, and I say should because we're working at it, next year be able to come in and we'll give you a reference sheet how to then put all of that information into Google Earth, which is an easier platform to manipulate. All right, let's talk about stand densities. All right, so we've mapped our stands, we have a better idea of where we're at. There's a couple different ways that we approached it. One, I wanted to know my overall trees per acre, and I was really focused on taps per acre in that sugar bush up in Escanaba. But I'm also interested in our basal area, all right? If you just look at the taps per acre, trees per acre, you don't really know how stocked your forest is, or how fast that forest is growing, or how it has stagnated. You know, a lot of times, and for those that know my dad, he doesn't cut enough trees because every maple tree to him is a potential tap. All right, he's slowing his overall forest down because he's not cutting enough. And you ask him what's your basal area, he really doesn't want to admit that he's measured it, but it's way too high. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So I really like to use both of these. All right, so I go out, I have my map in hand, and when I say I send my guys out to do it. After I'm confident they know what a 1 and 2 tap tree is, there's a whole nother funny story and they're not in the room, so we'll get there soon. That's the sugar bush on the right, okay? That's what I need to break down into manageable units that you know, I can send somebody out into that unit and have them measure stuff, all right? The red lines are our roads. So we have a fairly active road system in there. Again, this was used for a lot of different research projects, so we had to have good access. Perfect to break down counting in your woods. If you don't have a trail system like that, if you have to break it down into stands, again, you're looking at more of the topographic features out there where you can draw your lines. You need some way to break your system down into manageable units, all right? You don't want to bite off too much, or what you end up doing is you get lost in your woods, you forget where you're at, and you have no real accurate measure of what you have out there. So we've broken it down into manageable stands, and the first thing I had the guys do is go out. They each were given blocks to do, all right? So one group went out, one guy went out, and he only had to count the taps or the trees in that zone. And so we didn't want multiple people working in the same stand, out there. We wanted it to be a fairly accurate count. Also, when Darren and I would go out, I might count that as a 1-tap tree, he might count it as a 3-tap tree, all right? So I didn't want the variation in how things were counted, because then I can judge, is he an over and I'm an under? If we both worked in the same stand, I couldn't make those comparisons.
Well, when you are out there and you're counting trees, how do you know you're not counting the same tree twice?
So there's a couple different ways that we did it. So the question was, how do you know you're not counting the same tree twice, or that I counted it and Darren? So they make a couple different products. One, we took a logging or a lumber crayon, brightly visible. We went out in the wintertime, put an X on both sides of the tree when we counted it, all right? And I had, red and Nick had blue, another guy had yellow. So we knew which blocks we were in based on the color. So I could come back and I could gauge how good the guys did and what they missed. They also make a really cool, I don't want to call it a toy because I would never give it to my kids because it would be disaster, but they make a slapper, all right? So it's used in forestry to count trees. It's a leather, it's probably yay big, all right? It's got a 1-inch hole with a screen on the side of it. You fill it with line marking chalk, for a snap line. Fill it with the color you want, and you put a little plug in the end of it like a ruler, and you walk up to the tree, and I just go thunk, and it would have a perfectly colored chalk dot that will wash off over time. So it's not like you painted it with a paint can or marked on it with a crayon. So they call those slappers. You can get them at forestry suppliers or Ben Meadows. That's the other way we can do them, all right? Now, you're going to come out covered in chalk, or your hand will, so give the obnoxious colors to the people you don't like, and let them go out and count the trees. So yeah, you worry about double counting. Okay. That's why we also don't give them to the kids, because it's fun. It hurts a little bit when you get slapped, but nobody was hurt in the making of this talk. So you can see I have a tap number in each of these. Well, okay, that's good. I went back to Google Earth and I said, well, how many acres do each of those areas represent? And I found a leaf-off image where it actually showed my trails in throughout that woods. And so I was able to draw polygons and make, okay, this one's 6.8, that's 6.7, there's 7. All right. So now if we divide the number of trees or the number of taps by the acres, that gives us a rough idea of what we're looking at as taps or trees per acre, all right? But again, is that an accurate representation of what's out on the landscape? So if I average across this whole thing 50 to 55 taps per acre, that sounds pretty good. But is that realistic to what's out on the landscape? Yes or no? No, because we only counted the maples, all right? There's a lot of other trees out there. There's beech, there's hemlock, there's spruce. Unfortunately, all our beech are dying from beech bark disease, and the hemlock are dying. So primarily, we're going to have maple here in a little while. But those trees are still being influential on the maple trees. And so we have to go out and measure the non-maples. And we need to know what our basal area is. So when I look at that area, I break it down by those stands, and I know I want to point sample and collect basal area in each of those areas, all right? So if I have, I'm going to say this is 9 acres just to make the math easy, or 8, let's say 8 acres. If I have 8 acres, in northern hardwoods, our general rule is 1 sample point for 2 acres. If you have time, you do more than that. But the minimum is I'm going to do 1 sample every 2 acres. And I'm going to do a quick cruise. I'm going to do a basal area estimate. So I draw some transects in. Why do I use transects out there?
It gives you random points.
Gives you random sampling. We are all human. We are by default lazy. We will go out We might set the first point randomly, but I guarantee you it's going to be not in the buckthorn dominated swamp. It's not going to be in the multiflora rose. It's going to be along the deer trail that's nice and easy to walk. Guess where our next point's going to be? It's going to be down that same deer trail. It's not random. So what we do is we set the first point randomly. Anybody know how we do that? How do you do it?
I just basically put a dot on the map, and that's where I started.
You can do it that way. You have no idea other than the air photo. You put the dot, you go to that area. That's your starting point. All right? Could be in the middle of a godforsaken mess, or if you want to navigate to that, you get into the stand. You could do a random compass bearing that you account for, and then you go to that one, and you've already yelled out, I want to go 1 or 2 chains, and that's where you go, and you start. I've seen guys take kind of their Biltmore stick, they get into the middle of the stand, they flick it over their back, where it lands is the dead center point, and from there they have a known transect to go on, all right? Because we are all lazy. We will all go to where it's easy to walk, and that's not random, all right? So I put in these points, all right, or transects, and I just walk along either 2 chains or 3 chains, and the chain is 66 feet for those that are not in forestry, and that will allow me to do a point sample. So what are the prism? The prism is uniform. I can hand it to Darren, send him out to the woods, and he will get a number, bring it back to me. I can go to that exact same sample point. I can do it with that prism, and I should get the exact same number as him. If I send him out there with his thumb and use it as a 10-factor angle gauge, and then I go out in that same point, very rarely will we get the same, because my thumb is different than his thumb. So it works if you're the sole person going out to evaluate your woods and you do all of the sample points, you're fine. But you can't ever compare it across people unless you're a twin.
At 24 inches from your eye, a penny also works for a penny.
A penny will work. Yep. I'm too cheap. I was going to give you all a strip of black electrical tape on the end of a like a ruler or a slab of wood. That also works, but a penny will work. Yep. So anytime you can uniform your sampling and go between people, it makes it easier. So angle gauges, that's another way to do it. Stocking. All right, so this is crash course forestry in like 50 minutes. So my hope is you will go out and play with this. My hope is that you will not make major forest management decisions on your own. This is to get you interested in it and have you go out and get a professional forester to come into your ground. There is cost share available. I heard one of the speakers this morning. There is cost share available in every state for forest management plans to get a forester out there. It is well worth the time and effort and expense to get a forester there, because this is what they're trained for. There is science behind it that I'm showing you today. That's only one half of the forestry equation. The art of applying it on the ground is something very different, and that comes with experience. So we can give you the science, we can't ever teach you the art. And so when you hire a forester, you're already putting yourself into a different class, that they're the art form and how to put that science on the ground. But these are stocking tables. They've been around a long time, and it's important that you understand that stocking tables are for different areas of the country. There is a New England or a northeastern stocking table for sugar maple. There is a northern hardwoods or an upland hardwoods. There is a central hardwoods stocking table. In this part of Wisconsin, you're getting at that borderline where we're going back and forth between a central and a northern stocking table, all right? They also have them for plantations. They have them for red pine, white pine, maple. They have them for oak. They have them for mixed oak. So know what you're looking at when you get your stocking table out there. Now, what this has is a few different axes, all right? And you have to understand what you've just collected when you go out. And when I walk into a stand, it's that 8-acre stand, I've measured 4 sample plots, all right? So now I have 4 different sets of numbers that I'm looking at, all right? I'm going to have species, I'm going to have diameter, and I'm going to have the count of those trees. Let's say I now have, and I average all of those together at the end for that stand, all right? So I've averaged across all of the sample points in that one stand, and I have an average tree diameter of 10. So 10-inch diameter across all of my in trees. So this top goes from 7 to 15 inches. And they have, you know, ones for below 7 and ones for above 15. All right, so I've chosen this one. I have an average of 10 for my diameters. And I measured 13 in trees. All right, I told you that's a 10-factor prism. 10 times 13. So the factor is the times in this equation. So I measured 13 in trees that I took their diameters, and those diameters all measured or averaged out to 10. 13 times 10 is 130 square feet of basal area. And that's a measure of how much living wood is on that acre of ground. That's the estimate, all right? So this axis is the basal area. So if I have 130 square feet of basal area, and I know my average is 10 inches, I come across to here. Guess what I am? That stands overstocked. That stands outside of the range of overstocked. What's that telling me about the trees? They're not growing much at all. What does it tell me? They probably have small crowns. As a sugar producer, what makes maple syrup? What makes sap? What makes sweet sap? Crowns. So when I see a stand that is overstocked or super overstocked, I can tell you it's slowed its growth. And what happens when we slow growth? It happens to all of us as we age. We don't have the ability to fight off, not insects and diseases, I don't want to put that out there, but you have a harder time overcoming challenges. Same for trees. When they stagnate, they are basically creating just enough to survive, all right? They're not creating luxury. They're not the sweetest trees in the woods now. They're not providing a volume of sap, and they're going to have a harder time if they get hit with insects and disease or an ice storm. So what does it tell us? We have to drop the number of trees that we have on that, and we have to build our crown capacity back up. So if I know I have 130 and I go to 10, how many trees per acre am I looking at? Well, I drop straight down, and I can't even read it. I'm about 250 trees per acre. So now I already know, I know average diameter, I know trees per acre. All right? So now I can work with my forester and say, I really have way too many trees, they're stagnant, and I need to take this number and I want to maintain my base, or I want to maintain my average diameter across that. So how am I going to work with a forester to take that 10 and drop it down to, if I'm in this range in here, I am fully stocked, so I'm utilizing every acre of ground, and I'm also growing fast, which means I produce more sap. It means I can fight off insects and disease. You want to be in this range to grow, to have your forest be healthy. If you start squeaking up towards what we call the A line, you're beginning to slow the tree's growth. You're beginning to not have the returns that that acre of ground should produce. So this is now where we switch over, because we're now done with time because they just clapped. This is where you work with your forester to say, how do I implement a management plan to thin that? So let's say I'm looking at this as a new sugar bush. Do I put my tubing up and my lines in before I do my thinning? not unless you want to put everything back in after they do the thinning. But as you begin to creep up here, you need to evaluate the forest management that you're doing, all right? And this is something, if you know your tubing is getting to the end of its lifespan, this is something you do now. So you can begin the planning process for 2 to 3 years out to have it professionally managed, to have it thinned, so you can come back in with a whole new system, all right? You don't want to put the cart before the horse and get the sugar bush in there. If you've never had your sugar bush evaluated, go home. I know we're all busy and we're entering a very busy period out there, but go home and throw in some sample plots and see where you're at, all right? But don't just trust one sample plot or 2 or 3. Do a lot of them. You know, spend a day out there. You can also train kids to do this, as long as they know what a sugar maple is, all right? Funny story, and then we're done. I have 3 new employees, and when I say new, they've never made syrup before in their life. I gave them a crash course. We're out there. I had to go to a meeting. They were cutting drop lines into a new sugar bush. I had 1 ash tree and I had 1 hemlock. Hemlock is going to be awesome. And she was totally embarrassed, they tell me, because they caught her as she cut it and was going to, you know, cut the drop line in. But make sure you know your trees. You know, make sure whoever goes out there. So with that, there's a few more slides about how we thin and that type of thing. I always worry a little bit when I get into that you're going to go home and try to put it on the ground without talking to a forester first. So I'm going to stop there. And this talk will be online as soon as we get back. We've been able to record a lot of these talks. So I would encourage you to go to the MSU FBIC website, and it'll be under educational presentations or recent presentations. And so all of the talks that you weren't able to attend because you were sitting in here should be online as long as the technology has worked. So with that, I'm going to switch my talk over unless there are questions.
Question.
Not from Wisconsin Extension. No. Go ahead, Darren. And by the way, this is Darren. He is Wisconsin Extension. He and I are partnering on the Hurley educational event up north in February. Go ahead.
So when you were counting taps per acre there and taps per tree,
Yep.
were you guys factoring in the tree health and potential cull, or are they just going out and counting sugar maple stems?
Nope, we did exactly what you said. So we went in, and if it had a bad crown, now we're a little understocked in that stand anyways because we're losing our ash, or we lost our ash, we're losing our beech. But if it had a canker on it, if it was something that should be removed from a health standpoint, they did not count it. You know, the producer in me says, Daniel, you tap every tree. If you're understocked or close to being borderline, you tap every tree until it dies. But the demo in me says, no, we got to get that old sick tree out of there. So no, we accounted for culls in those numbers. So we should aim for around 2,500 in that one sugar bush, 22 to 2,500. Anything less than that, I'm going to blame Joe Pollock because he was walking it with me. So, did I say he helped? Oh, sorry. We just walked the trails. You know, we evaluated that sugar bush based on which trail was easiest to walk that day. So, any other questions? I really encourage you to get a forester.
Monoculture.
Yep. We're there.
Okay. I've heard that, you know, monoculture really doesn't matter if it's a small plot, but it matters if you have a large plot. And I was wondering,
I'm scared.
what is small or what is large?
So we have 30 acres, and we've lost our ash. We're losing our beech. The hemlock is not long for that world, and so I have a few spruce and fir in the understory, and such a high deer herd that I'm not getting trees to regenerate. And I'm terrified. I mean, it's not a matter of if the new bug is going to come, it's when it's going to hit us. And so, you know, if it were my own personal sugar bush, I would do everything I can to keep my diversity in that stand as high as I could, but still have a profitable sugarbush. And the next question is, what is profitable in terms of tree numbers? And I gotta be honest, I don't know. I've seen numbers out there where you want anything more than 75% as sugar maples is you're way too high. I'm way over that. I'm probably in the 90s in terms of sugar maple percentage. And so we're actively going to go in and try to add some diversity back into that system, knowing that we're going to have to plant, we're going to have to protect it from deer. But if you're creeping up above 75%, and that's something your forester should be aware of and should work with you on, and if that forester doesn't say, hey, you know, you're kind of moving this thing towards a monoculture, that calls into question the forester, and they should, if they don't bring it up, you should bring it up to your forester and say, hey, what is a safe level to have diversity and resilience? It's only going to get worse, not better, in terms of insects and disease, given our global market that we live in. It's, you know, if you look at the Asian longhorn beetle, it's going to devastate the maple industry if it gets here in our region and is not controlled. Maybe not in our lifetime, but, you know, I don't want to be, it's not like EAB because it moves a lot smaller. Its populations don't grow as fast, but it's still decimating sugar maples where it does have an outbreak. You just don't want to be the outbreak center.
So you're talking about adding trees back then, but what can you add? It seems like being a tree now. What can you add?
That's a great segue into like a whole nother hour-long talk of what is appropriate. We don't want it is a maple, you can tap it. So when I look at what trees to add, we have a study that's going in right now, and if you look at some of the Forest Service guidelines of what they're doing on their ground, they're moving south and they're moving southwest in terms of where they get their seed stock from. And that is what we're following. So I'm looking similar type soils. I'm looking, you know, 50 to 100 miles southwest of my facility for what those trees are. And I do that because in 100 years when those trees are harvestable, let's say they're oaks or something, 100, 120, I want them to be able to seed and have that seed be viable for that given time frame with those conditions, if you look at some of their modeling. And so, again, I'm not planting every tree like that, but I'm hedging my bets. I'm going to plant 50%. You know, basically, I'm assisting the migration of those trees from the south and southwest up to my facility. 50% will just be a local genotype. But the other thing I'm doing, and throw it out there, we're looking at super sweet trees. How many folks have heard of sweet trees? Mother Nature put sweet trees out on the landscape. And we now have trees that we have seed from, and they're between, the ones I have now are between 4%, 3 to 4%, and 9% sugar. All right? Why are they out there? We don't know why Mother Nature put them out there, but we have them, we're growing them, and we're going to look across the range of maple to see how they do. So I'm planting back in with some of these super sweets, and I'm going to give them a name, social security number. I'm going to do everything I can to get them to survive. I'm going to fence them. I'm going to do the weed control I need to, but that's a whole nother talk out there of what trees to plant moving forward, because everything has an insect and disease.